state Senate in California has just passed a landmark bill that aims to give fast food workers in the state more of a say over their working conditions and how much they get paid for the work they do. Now, the final version of the legislation was unfortunately watered down a little bit as a result of corporate lobbying. We'll get to those details in just a moment. You don't want to miss them. But here are some of the concerns. Here is what the legislation will do. The number one concern is we need the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, to sign it into law. And unfortunately, there is reason to believe that he might veto it. Here's why. Newsom has not said whether he will sign the bill, but his Department of Finance argued against the legislation in a recent analysis, claiming it, quote, could lead to a fragmented regulatory and legal environment for employers and raise long-term costs across industries. Now, that last part is probably correct, because if you are forced to negotiate wages with your workers, likely you're gonna have to pay your workers a little more. So it would increase costs. But when you look at the profits that are made by fast food companies, they're gonna be they'll be fine, okay? Now, what will this do? According to Mary Kay Henry, who is the international president of the SEIU, she says it will give 550,000 fast food workers a chance to sit down with government and their employers to decide wages and working conditions. I cannot overstate how significant this is. It sets the standard for what states and cities around the country should be doing to support workers. So the idea here is, instead of having workers for, let's say, one fast food franchise negotiate, unionize on their own, they're trying to increase the leverage of collective bargaining by getting all fast food workers a seat at the table as like one major unit, okay? So under US law, as Josh Edelson, a labor reporter at Bloomberg says, most workers have the right on paper to unionize and collectively bargain with their boss if a majority of their coworkers are on board. But in practice, workers in industries like fast food have found it very difficult, and unionization has been plummeting for decades. He continues to say, in fast food, SEIU is advocating state-level sectoral bargaining as an alternate form of collective bargaining, but also as a step toward winning unionization, federal labor law changes, and those long-sought nationwide agreements with the top chains. Now, before I get into how corporate lobbying watered it down just a little bit, I want to go to you, Cenk, because this is overall really, really good news. And despite corporate lobbying watering it down a little bit, the fact that this has passed the state legislature is a big deal. The question is, will Gavin Newsom sign it?
So what's frustrating is that Republicans get their politicians to do almost anything, right? Stop teaching actual history, pretend there was no racism in the country. Republican politicians are, yeah, great, love it, let's pass laws right away. Pretend that transgender kids in high school sports is the biggest issue in America. Republican politicians are like, right away, pass the law, sign it into effect, oppress people, etc. For Democrats, why do we have to beg Gavin Newsom to do something that's obvious? What, are you for the working class or aren't you? Why is this hard? Why is this complicated? With Gavin Newsom, everything is hard. You have to beg him, plead him. And then, by the way, you can't be too tough as you're asking him to do the bare minimum, because then he'll be offended. And then the media will get offended on his behalf. And the media will write stories about how progressives offended Gavin Newsom. And that's why he punished all the workers in California. Why is this hard, Gavin? All of the unions are in favor of it. It is overwhelmingly popular in California. Why is this hard? By the way, it's the same exact thing Gavin Newsom did with the Living Wage Act. We just did a petition on it. 3 different US congressmen signed on, which is extraordinary, let alone unions and other parts of the Democratic Party in California. The $18 minimum wage ballot issue was supposed to go on the ballot this year. It's definitely going on in 2024. And just ask Gavin Newsom for something simple. Put it on the ballot this time around so they can get the raise right away. It's gonna pass easily. It's overwhelmingly popular. Higher wages, of course it's popular, right? And Newsom's like, no, I don't want him having higher wages. And everybody begs, oh, please, Gavin, please, can you give higher wages? No, No. So elect Democrats so that you could plead with them to do the bare minimum and then have them give you crumbs and then have the media declare it historic.
Now, the reason why that there's that difference between Democrats and Republicans is because they're funded by similar corporate interests, right?
100%.
I mean, you have Gavin Newsom hanging out at the French Laundry in the middle of the pandemic after he essentially implements some pretty strict COVID restrictions. He's there to fundraise with his corporate donors. And so the reason why it's easy for Republican voters to get Republican politicians to carry out what they claim they want to carry out is because all you hear from Republican politicians is culture war garbage. That's it. And it's easy to deliver that because all it takes is just being hateful toward powerless groups of people who don't have the money to buy you in elections, right? So with Democrats, they're in a tough spot because they like campaigning on issues related to equity. They like campaigning on issues that would certainly appeal to any economic populist. But once they're elected, they remember, yeah, but I'm funded by those corporate donors. So when push comes to shove, I'm not really gonna do anything. And that's the issue here. So let's talk about the corporate donors real quick, Jen, because I think it's important to understand how their lobbying efforts did lead to some provisions in this final legislation that are certainly watered down. So for instance, the California Chamber of Commerce complained that the bill's definition of fast food restaurant is so broad, it will encapsulate far more than what we think of as traditional fast food establishments and is vague in differentiating between to-go service, counter service, and traditional sit-down restaurants. To which I say, sounds great. Sounds like they're casting a wide net. I'm here for it. But what's not a great thing is that the Chamber of Commerce, of course, represents businesses who do fund politicians, yes, even in California on a state level. And so the watering down of the bill looks like this. They removed a joint liability clause that would have made the franchisors responsible for labor law violations. Okay, so there's the franchisee. So think of McDonald's, for instance. That's the franchisee, and then there's the franchisor. And that's the individual who decides to, buy one of the McDonald's stores and turn that into their business, right? According to the way the bill was written, the franchisor will not be held liable the way a franchisee would. Okay. Also, reductions in the size of the governing council. It would implement this governing council to kind of oversee this whole program and the negotiations. They were initially supposed to have 13 people as part of this governing council, but it's been watered down to 10, with 4 of the individuals representing the franchisor and 4 of the individuals representing the fast food workers. And then the bill sunsets in 6 years so the lawmakers can revisit it to see if it's working. So those are the watered down components of it. Cenk.
Yeah, so the sunset provision among all the bad provisions, I think is the worst one.
Agreed.
Because in 6 years, we're gonna have to have this battle all over again. By the way, do you wanna know why they put the sunset provision in? They never put it in when it is a right-wing law. Almost never is it ever put in. It was put in once on tax cuts that were so gigantic by George W. Bush that he couldn't make them permanent. Of course, the overwhelming majority of those tax cuts went to the rich. But don't worry, when Obama and Biden got in charge, Biden negotiated with McConnell and made 94% of them permanent. Okay, so the reason in this case that it sunsets is that 6 years from now, both Republicans and Democrats, but mainly Democrats in California, can go and get more bribes from the Chamber of Commerce. They say, okay, we might help the workers another time, so you better give us money, give us money, give us money, give us money, okay? And next time they'll probably kill it. And that's how the scam goes, because we run our politics based on bribery. So yeah, look, but I'm shocked that a Democratic legislature has done anything positive, and that's great. Credit where credit is due. Good job, California legislature. Now, of course, if they're playing hot potato and they agreed ahead of time with Gavin Newsom, we'll kill a portion of it, Gavin, and you kill a portion of it, and then we'll just diffuse blame. And then even though we control California 100%, super majority, we'll pretend there was nothing we could do, right? But in this particular case, good job, California legislators and all the Democrats there. But Gavin Newsom still collecting bribes from the Chamber of Commerce while he makes his decision.